Hello, and welcome back to the My First Marathon podcast. My name's Taylor, and today we talk to a runner who was never someone who was in love with running, but started during COVID as a way to get out of the house. During this time, there weren't any in person races, so her first in person race was actually her first marathon, which she ran as part of the Disney series. We talk about how she balanced being a parent and training, how slowing down in the beginning was what really got her to fall in love with running, and now how her and her husband have a goal to run a race in every state. I think you can find some great nuggets of information in this one, so without further ado, please welcome Kacy. Kacy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm excited to talk to you. How's your weekend going so far?
Good so far. Went to the pool this morning with the kids.
Nice. Cool off. How hot is it where you live? I know it's pretty hot and humid here in North Carolina.
I'm in Savannah, so it's pretty much the same probably.
Similar. Yeah, it's a brutal time of year to be running, of course, but hopefully we get through the summer sooner than later. But yeah, like I said, excited to break down your marathon journey here today. I guess we'll just kind of start from the top. How did you get introduced to this world in the first place?
So one of those kids that was like never very good at sports, kind of hated running, dabbled in the occasional local race if I got roped into it, but I wouldn't train for it and walked the majority of it. But then 2020 comes along and I go from working full time as an optometrist to at home with my 5-month-old, my 2-year-old, and my 5-year-old who is now doing virtual kindergarten.
Wow.
So a friend of my, I think my sister's, was starting a virtual race because hers got canceled, and she was just basically trying to get a bunch of people into like a running community so that people had something to do during COVID. And she's like, "Hey, they have a race coming up in 3 weeks if you need something to do." So I'm like, okay, let me see what I can find as far as training for a 5K in 3 weeks, and like did some Googling and basically found a 3-week couch to 5K program and was like, all right, I'm in, let's do it. So my mother-in-law and father-in-law thankfully did not abandon us during COVID. And so they were helping me out with the kids while my husband was working from home at their house. And so one day I'm like, hey, I'm going to go running. And she's like, you're going to do what? Because everybody knows that I do not like running. And I'm just like, I just need to get out of the house. So I kind of started from mostly walking, but it was basically like an interval program, and ran the first 5K. And then they decided they were going to do a second race, I think about a month or 6 weeks later. And so I'm like, well, maybe I can do a 10K. So did the virtual 10K. And then after that, I was just kind of like, what else can I do with this? It was like nice to have something that I could do other than just being a mom of 3 kids after, not being able, it made me feel like a more productive person.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of people got into running that COVID year because, like you said, just out of like boredom almost. Like I just need to get out of my house and maybe move my body a little bit. Those first couple of weeks, though, the first few runs are never easy when you're going like couch to a certain distance. So what were those first couple like actual runs like for you?
I mean, I just remember like I've been doing like strength training and just cardio workouts for years, and it was just a totally different kind of soreness. Like my legs hurt, my abs hurt, which I did not expect. I had no idea how much core you use during running. And just like I felt like I was dying, even though I think the first walk intervals were maybe like walk for 3 minutes, run for 1 minute, or maybe even 30 seconds. And after that 30 seconds or a minute, I was just like completely out of breath. But that
Yeah.
kind of the walking and running alternating is actually what kind of helped me fall in love with running in the first place. And I've actually kind of stuck with that for the longer distances. It kind of the running to get to the walk is what motivates me.
Yeah, sure. That makes total sense. I know a lot of people will adopt that like run walk strategy even for marathons too. So that's great. Is that what the couch to 5K plan like really endorsed was like walk first and then take kind of on and off running breaks? Is that how it was broken down?
Yeah, it was like it basically would gradually increase the number of intervals and then like the amount of time you were running in the first place. And I think by like the last week like before the 5K, you were doing like 20 minutes straight of running
Mm.
before you took a walk break. And then I think maybe the last run before the actual 5K. It was just like run as far as you feel like you can, and then, walk if you need to. So the shorter distances I still feel comfortable running, but longer the run walk is way easier.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of those plans that in the beginning that are like give you a little bit of grace. It's like you just said, walk if you need to. I like those a lot. I think they're a little bit more palatable in the beginning, versus the training plans that are like run for 30 minutes by the end of your training plan. I think it could be a little
Hmm.
intimidating.
Yep.
Um, but cool. And then you ran your first 5K after following that plan. What was that race like? You said it was a virtual race.
Yeah, it was a virtual race. I did it by myself. Like my at that point, it was just me running, but my husband and my kids were like super supportive, and I like basically did an out and back from my house, but like they knew about what time I was going to be coming home, and so he had them all out there like cheering me
Oh, that's
on when I
great.
came back. So it was kind of like having a finish line. So that was cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's great that they were supportive like that. And did you kind of feel like I know it's not the typical first race experience, but did you kind of feel like you were starting to catch the bug from there?
I mean, I I feel like the 5K, I was like, well, let me just see. But I feel like once I finished that 10K, which I think was around Memorial Day weekend of that year, after that 10K, I was like, okay, well, if I can do 10K, like, what else is out there? And at that point, I feel like I was really hooked.
Yeah, yeah, kind of got over that hump a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and then training from 5K to 10K, was it a similar plan that you followed, like a couch to 10K type plan, or did you switch it up from there?
I used the website was Snacking and Sneakers. It's like a run coach who has like some plans on there, but she had like a 10K plan as well. And I just I think the plan was longer than the time I had, but because I just trained for the 5K, I just kind of backtracked the number of weeks. But yeah, I did have some run walk, but because at that point they're kind of expecting you've done some running already, the intervals were longer. So I think maybe it was like 3 minutes of running, 1 minute of walking, or something of that nature.
Gotcha. Okay, so pretty much continued along that path.
Hmm.
And then the 10K you said is where you started to catch the bug. So were you thinking like, all right, let me sign up for a half marathon, or what were you thinking after that 10K?
So kind of a funny story after that. So I mean, it's still COVID. There's still no races happening. There's actually a women's half marathon that's in Savannah, and they had postponed their spring race to the fall. And at some point, I don't even remember exactly when, my husband at this point was like not a runner, but he's like, if I was going to run a marathon, it would be the Disney marathon. And so I don't know,
Mm,
at some point he'd mentioned that. And so sometime after this 10K, I just happened to Google the previous route. I think it was from 2020 because they weren't having a race in 2021, and I just sent him the map and was like, "Hey, so remember when you said this? What do you think?" And he he likes to say he called my bluff. He Because I was convinced that he was going to be like, I don't run. Like, what are you talking about?" And he's like,
sure.
"Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, we maybe we could do that." And he went from like barely exercising like a round of golf here and there to starting to run as well, because he's like, "Yeah, maybe we can do this marathon thing one day." And so I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to do a marathon, I need to do a half marathon first. But I did not trust that that fall race was going to happen. But I wanted to do something local. So I signed up for the 2021 women's half marathon, which was supposed to be in March of that year. So I start training for that pretty much on my own. My husband was also just running. He actually ended up joining a run club, but just because of the
Mm,
kids and the way our schedule works, usually he'd go to the run club and then I would run later. So it just worked out better schedule wise. And for me, I didn't mind running alone because I like just, having that time to myself. And so it wasn't a
yeah.
big deal to me to not be the one running with the group. So I was training for that. Get to January of 2021, and they're like, "Hey guys, the city says we can't have this race, so we have to postpone it until November of this year." So I'm
Oh,
like,
geez.
well, I've just spent 2 months training for this race. So I actually ended up running, like looking up the route online and running that race virtually the weekend it was supposed to happen in March. So I did another virtual half marathons, and I've done 3 races, and none of them are in real life. But I still felt pretty accomplished. That one I was actually completely by myself, and so nobody was there to welcome me at the finish line, but I was still kind of, I was just proud of myself that I put in the training and got the race done. So continued training, expecting to do the one in November. Um, June of that year, Disney announces that they're bringing racing back in person. And so, I've already talked to my husband and he's like mentioned possibly doing this and he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so we had told my family and my brother's like, "Well, if you're doing a marathon, I'm doing a marathon." So he's like, "I'm going to do it too." And then my dad, my mom, my brother-in-law and my sister all signed up to do or were planning to do the 5K. But I don't know how much you've heard about Disney races. It's kind of crazy trying to get into those races. They
Uh-huh.
like basically everybody logs on at the same time and you put in this queue and it's just luck of the draw. And
Wow.
so I'm at I'm at work, in July of 2021 in this queue, trying to like check between patients to see where I am, in this line to make sure that I don't miss my chance. And by some miracle, all seven of us managed to get the race that we wanted.
Wow.
So now we're like, all right, I guess we're doing the marathon in January of 2022. So starting pretty much right after that, I started marathon training, still planning to do that November half marathon. And then I don't even remember how long before they completely canceled the race. But at that point, I'm like,
Jeez.
whatever, I'm doing the marathon. I'm not worried about doing another virtual half. So I just kept following the plan, and that's kind of how it went.
Wow. So your first, and we'll kind of get there eventually, but your first actual race experience was the marathon, really.
Yeah, that was my first in-person race.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy. And what do you feel like kept you motivated during that time? Because I know a lot of people will say the races are what keep them motivated to kind of build up to the marathon. So like what was keeping you motivated?
I mean, for me, just as a mom of young kids, that had become like exercise had always been my me time, but like now having not just like 30 minutes to myself, like having like hours on a Saturday where it was just something that I could do to focus on me and my like mental and physical health, that was what kept me motivated was, I am doing something for me that maybe I don't always put myself first.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, I'm not a mother myself, but I've talked to a couple of mothers on here that also balance kind of marathon training. And I know it's a lot of give and take, it seems like. So how do you feel like, or maybe like, what's some advice that you have for mother runners who are trying to train for their first marathon?
I mean, I think the main thing is not getting like bogged down with some of those like high mileage plans because I feel like a lot of those like blogs and like marathon plans have you running like hours every week. And like I did the first one, I kind of sort of like I looked up the Jeff Galloway plan on the Run Disney website. And he has like 2 30-minute runs during the week and then like a long run on Saturdays. And then I ended up finding a website called Train as One that does like adaptive training plans. And so I basically kind of plugged in that schedule to their training plan and did like 2 30-minute runs during the week with like strength training on the other 3 days, and then did the long run on Saturdays. And like even just working out 30 minutes those 5 days a week and the long run on Saturdays, like I felt like that was manageable and I felt like that was plenty of miles for what my goals were.
Sure.
So just
Sure. Yeah.
basically just fitting it in where you can.
Yeah, and it sounds like fun, like taking the time to like do your due diligence on a plan that's going to work for you too. 'Cause it seems like a lot of people will love the Run with Howl stuff. I know the app Runna has been coming up a lot lately that people are following, but it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. I guess is the point there. But I'm curious about like breaking down training a little bit more for you. So, what was like building up mileage week over week like for you the first time around?
So the way this plan works, it was kind of interesting. They have a pretty good FAQ section because it actually tends to be a little lower mileage than some of the other plans, which, being a newbie, I wasn't really like bothered by it. My husband was following, I think, completely following the Jeff Galloway training plan, so he
Mm,
was like doing their mileage, and so some of my like longer runs, like I felt like it built up to the medium long runs more quickly, and but it was kind of nice because there was sometimes where I'd feel like oh my gosh, I feel like I'm dying after this run. And the plan would like, I think it tracks your like heart rate and stuff like that, and would kind of auto adapt. And like my next run would be a little easier. And so
Mm,
that was kind of cool to not feel like, oh, even though I feel like I'm dying, I still have to do this like 12-mile run this weekend. Like the plan auto adjusts to kind of make up for that. But the way that it kind of worked is looking, I think it was about 3 months out, you got into like kind of those like medium teen distances. And usually it would be like anywhere from like 13 to 16 miles, like 3 weeks in a row. And then you'd kind of have a down week. And so my longest run was actually only about 16 miles, but I did that several times over the course of a few months. And I was like,
mm.
maybe a little tiny bit concerned that there was nothing longer than that. But I also was like a new person, and I'm also like, I'm just blindly trusting this training plan. So even though that was my longest run, I was just like, well, I'm just trusting that because it says I'm ready, that I'm ready. So
Yeah. That's all you can do the first time around. It's like you
yeah,
got the information in front of you and you just kind of have to do the best you can with it for sure.
yeah.
And were there any like your first time around, like we just said, it's a lot of trial and error. So was there anything that you tried during training that just did not work for you or where you felt like you hit a wall or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, I'd done like lot of like researching ahead of time on like fueling and stuff like that. So for the first one, I was like using goo and had like a hydration vest and stuff like that. So I felt like that part was pretty good. And like because I didn't have any issues with the goo, I just kind of stuck with that for that entire training cycle. So they were kind of easy to carry. But yeah, nothing. I mean, I do remember on some of the longer runs, especially because in Savannah, probably much like North Carolina, it'll start to cool off and then it's like, just kidding, it's hot
Yeah.
again. And so sometimes some of those like longer runs, if it was on a hotter day, even with the intervals, were kind of brutal. And that like that was kind of tough. And in fact, I was like kind of looking back through some of the conversations I had with people around the time, and about halfway through the marathon training, I had told my sister that I was never doing a long distance race ever again, that I was going to stick with 5Ks. So I was like committed to following through on this race because I'd already said I was going to do it and paid for it and signed up. But I was like, after this race, I am not doing this. This is not any fun.
Yeah. And you said it was because of the heat for the most part that you were
Yeah,
starting to kind of
yeah,
doubt.
just the back and forth on the weather, like it'd be nice one week and then like not nice one week, and just never knowing what you were gonna get.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of like it helps prepare you for marathon day for sure because you never really know what you're going to expect on race day. But when you're in training for your first one, it does kind of feel like week over week, am I still doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, why did my pace drop so much, or why is my heart rate up so much?
Hmm.
It is very a lot of up and down for sure through training. Um, you said that you did most of your runs solo, right? Your husband and you
Hmm.
kind of like staggered schedules.
Yes.
Are you a music listener on those runs? Do you like use the time to kind of be internal? Like what do you typically do on a solo run?
During when I was training for that, I hadn't found podcasts yet, so I actually listened to audiobooks on pretty much
Mm,
all of my runs. Like, I'm not a huge music person just in general, but I love to read, and so listening to audiobooks was a good distraction, especially on some of the harder runs.
yeah. Yeah. I like audiobooks a lot too. I think it helps you slow down a bit too if you're a victim of coming out a little hot.
Yeah, definitely helps on the easy runs for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And then through training, like I feel like there's always a point where you feel like the marathon distance might be in reach. You run one of your long runs and you go, okay, that actually felt pretty decent. Did you have a moment like that through training where you felt like it was a little bit more in reach?
Yeah, we were in Florida for something. I don't even remember why we were there, but we went to this trail down in Tallahassee, and I did a long run there that had like basically the center section of the run was at like a faster pace, and like the weather was like perfect that day, and it was very flat, and just like by the time I finished that run, I felt like a rock star. Like I think that still, even though it wasn't official, is like my half marathon PR was like that
Mm,
14-mile run. And I just felt like amazing at the end and felt like I could easily have kept going. So that, and yeah, I think that was like middle to end of October.
yeah,
So a
it's nice
couple.
when all the cards align like that.
Hmm.
Well, cool. And then, so I know the half marathon unfortunately got canceled, but you still had, you still were gonna complete training. That didn't set you back too much. When you ran your longest run, so your 16-mile run, you mentioned like doubt going through your head because you knew some people run maybe longer mileage before their marathon. So what was going through your head when you ran that 60-mile run?
I mean, I ran a couple of them, and I think at least one of them was on one of those hotter days. And again, I
Hmm.
just was like, I still, even while I was running it, was like, well, this is kind of terrible. I'm not sure if adding on 10 more miles, if it's at this temperature, is going to work for me. But, we're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other and hope for the best.
Yeah. Yeah, so just hoping for the best. And then how did you do any sort of like taper period in between your last 16 miler and your marathon day?
Yeah, I think there was like, it was like a 3-week taper, and I had maybe like a 10-mile run and an 8-mile run before the actual marathon.
Okay. So you did do a little bit of a taper and you were kind of like declining on mileage a bit.
hmm
Um and then race week, like how were you feeling about the marathon the week leading up?
I mean, I felt pretty good at that point. We had all planned to get there, I think on the marathon was on Sunday, and I think we all came in either on, I guess that must have been Wednesday because the 5K was on Thursday. I believe, yeah. The 5K was on Thursday, so we all came in Wednesday and met at the expo and picked up all our stuff. And then we didn't do much then because all of them had to get up really early the next day to do the 5K. And then I do remember the Saturday before the race, for whatever reason, we decided it was a good idea to go to the parks. And so we're at the park most of I think we went to Epcot. We're at the park most of the day, and like probably around 2 or 3 I'm like, my feet hurt and I have to run a marathon tomorrow. So we
Yeah,
got to go home. This was not a good idea. So, but I guess it was a good distraction from kind of just like a little bit of the first marathon anxiety type stuff.
totally. Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of things to do in that area for sure. But I see what you mean about like time on your feet. That would be a little nerve wracking the day before. And the Disney Marathon, I'm a little familiar with it, but isn't it structured like 5Ks one day, halves one day, and marathons one day? Or
It's 5K, 10K, half, and then full, and they're yeah, each on a different day. So if you've heard
yeah,
anybody who's done like the Dopey Challenge, they do all 4 races.
yeah, that's pretty cool. So your family was racing like 3 days before you were basically, and then you and your
Yes,
husband were going to do the marathon.
and my brother. Yes.
And your
He-
brother. Okay, cool. Cool. So marathon day rolls around. I mean, you had already been in the area, hopefully had already kind of acclimated a little bit. What was the like start line logistics and feeling like?
So we had to get up at like 2:30 a.m. to catch our bus from the hotel that we were staying at, and we were on property, which is nice because they have like the transportation there.
Mm,
Except for our bus driver got lost. So
shoot.
so by the time we got there, like, there's normally, like a kind of a hangout area, and people are just like chilling. They have like, water, and people are warming up and stretching and things like that. By the time we got there, like everybody was already in their corrals. And in fact, like we were in like the back two corrals anyway, and so it wasn't a big deal for us, but there were people who were on our bus who weren't able to get into the corral they were supposed to be in because they'd already
Mm,
closed them. So that was a bit of an adventure, but thankfully we made it before the race actually started because that would have been terrible.
yeah. Yeah, so a little bit of stress in the morning, but everybody got there. And that for just a marathon, like just having the marathon on one day, it's quite a few people. Do you remember how many people actually are just there on marathon day?
I don't know the exact number, but it's multiple thousands.
Yeah,
It's a
it's a
big
pretty big
race.
race.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the energy like? Were people pretty excited around you? Like music? You were starting because this is your first in person race, so I would imagine it's like a whole new experience for you.
I mean, there's some excitement, but it's also like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I've been up since
Sure.
2:30. So I mean, I had brought like a pre-workout drink with me and like drank that like shortly before starting the race, but like I hadn't had any caffeine at by the time we got to the corrals yet, and I think there was a lot more people who were like in zombie mode as opposed to like excitement mode.
Yeah, which is probably not the end of the world. I'd rather be like a little mellow than be super anxious. So, that's good. And did you have any sort of goals for this race going in, or was it more of a this is my first marathon, I just want to finish this thing?
Yeah, I wanted to finish. I didn't want to get swept. That was my goal.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. I had this guy come up to me. If you listened to my episode, you probably heard it, but he came up to me on my race day and told me, "You're going to PR today because it's your first one." So I think it's
Yeah.
good to kind of take that pressure off of yourself for sure on your first one. But then you started, so then the race starts, and you were you in the same corral as your family?
So my brother didn't put a expected finish time, so he was in the last corral, and
Mm.
at first he said he was going to run with me. So I ended up like, even though I could have been in the corral ahead of him, I went back with him. And then he decided basically right after he started that I was too slow and he wanted to go faster. So he left me behind. So I started in that corral for no reason, but that's okay.
Okay, so you ended up doing the race pretty much solo, I guess.
Yep.
And what was the first, let's just say, like first 10 miles like for you?
So the Disney races like start, like I said, at 5 a.m. and you go through all four parks. So the first, like, you go through half of Epcot initially, and then with between the parks, there's a lot of dead zones where there's like no people, no nothing. And at this point, it's like pitch black dark. So I honestly feel like I slept through like the first like 2 hours of the race, because you go all the way from Epcot to like the ticket and transportation center. And that was really the first time. And that was probably around like maybe mile 5 or 6 where you saw any people at
Mhm.
all. And so there were like spectators there, and they had like a drum line set up and things like that. And then like shortly after you go there is where you go into Magic Kingdom, which is still my favorite part of the race, because you go through there and then you run through the castle, which a lot of people think that's really cool, but honestly that wasn't the best part. Have you been to Disney World at all?
I have not Disney World, been to Disneyland, but haven't made it to Disney
Well,
World yet.
they have like do they have like a Main Street USA
Yes.
or whatever?
Yes.
So
Yes.
Main Street USA, you like turn the corner and you're like running down the road, and that's where the majority of the spectators are. And the park itself is closed, but they will let, like spectators of the racers come in for free. And like people were just cheering, and that was like still the most like that was the best part of the race for me. I was like finally awake then. It's finally light outside. Like I was tearing up because I was like, all these people are here at like 6:30 in the morning to cheer for us. So that was like a really cool experience. And then once you left Magic Kingdom, that like I was gonna say the 10th mile probably were somewhere between like Magic Kingdom and Animal Kingdom, and so not too much going on between there. So but that was definitely a really cool experience, just running down Main Street with all those people like cheering from the sidelines.
Yeah. The spectator feeling is like it's unreal. And I feel like you could even run a little local race with a good crowd and it's going to feel the same. It's pretty cool. But let alone Disney, that just sounds amazing. Was it like a nice distraction to have all of those things going on around you for the marathon?
Yeah, I mean, it was, but again, just there's so much dead zones between the parks. Like it was like great when you were in the parks, but then you
Mm,
like got out and you're basically just running on like highways with no people. And so then it's like, okay, so I actually still listened to audiobooks during the race, just as like kind of a like not while I was in the parks, but like just to distract me until I got to the next park, just because there's like
sure.
nothing out there
How
other
long are
than mile
those?
markers.
Yeah, sure. And how long are those stretches with like no people, would you say?
I mean, it depended, like, maybe as much as even, like, 4 miles, like, it was
Yeah,
it
that's
was
a
pretty
lot.
far, like, Magic Kingdom's, like, way up there, so from Epcot to Magic Kingdom was probably the farthest one. It may have even been, like, 5 miles, but it was a lot. There was less dead space between the other ones because then you run by some of the resorts and people will come out of the resorts, but that was definitely the hardest stretch, but it was also the part where most people were still asleep, so it probably worked out okay.
Yeah, sure, sure. So yeah, but 5 miles without a crowd support for a race like that, that's a long time. Once you would get like back into a park area, did you feel your energy pick up a little bit? Like did you find yourself slowing down when you would be in between parks and then picking it back up when you would get into a park or Anything like
I would
that?
say, yeah, it just kind of depended on the section because there was actually more room to like maneuver around people outside of the parks than there was
Mm,
in the parks because there would be spots where the path was kind of narrow, and by the time we got to the next park, which was Animal Kingdom, the parks were open, so they had basically like half of the sidewalk blocked off for the runners and the other half was for the people who were actually like at the parks. So there was less room once we got there than there was initially. So, yes, yes and no. It was nice just to have more stuff to look at. My husband thought it was kind of funny because he's like, I'm not sure anybody at Animal Kingdom knew there was actually a race going on. They all looked really confused when we ran by.
that's funny. They're like, "What?" And need to check the park schedule for the day and see what's going on. So you were originally going in with the run walk plan up until like mile 16. I know that's kind of uncharted territory for you, but when leading up to mile 16, were you still pretty consistent with that like run walk strategy, or did anything change on race day?
No, I basically decided going in that I was going to whatever reason, I arbitrarily was like, I'm gonna run for 5 minutes and walk for 5 minutes, which, after the fact, I'm like, that was too long of an interval because the walking, like, you had too much time to cool down. But I mean, it seemed to work okay on the actual day. I just, because I didn't care about my finish time, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't like gas myself and like
Yeah.
wasn't able to finish the race. And so it was kind of funny because they have like run walk pacing groups, but they were obviously doing much shorter intervals, and so we would just end up like yo-yoing and passing each other along the course, so that was kind of entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah. So there were pacers and you were kind of keeping them in sight. Um when you got to mile 16, like obviously that's the longest run that you had run so far. So what were you thinking? Where did it feel like the longest run? Were you still feeling pretty good? Like what was going on?
It was pretty hot at that point. Like
Mm,
when we started the race, I think it was like high 50s, and by the time we got out of Animal Kingdom, which was like maybe around the halfway point, like it was up around 70. So
wow.
we got out of Animal Kingdom and it was like pretty hot, and they we passed by, they had like a kiddie pool that was full of sponges, which like I ended up skipping, but apparently my husband like grabbed one and said it was like the best part of the race basically because he just kept like re-wetting his sponge at every water stop. But yeah, it was really hot after that. And then like there's just not a lot of stuff between like Animal Kingdom and then you used to run through one of the water parks, but at this point they were still renovating it. So you basically just ran through the parking lot. And that's around like mile 17, 18. And at that point I was like chafing really bad. I was like, it was hot. I was tired. And like, so I actually like stopped at one of the medical tents and like got some Vaseline for my legs because I was just like, if I keep going another like 8 miles with this chafing, like it's not going to be good. So I like
Yeah.
just took a break, did that, went to the bathroom, and then just like kept going. And thankfully, once you got to to Hollywood Studios after that parking lot, it was like it was like boom, boom, boom as far as like the last three sections. So it was pretty. It like once I got to Hollywood Studios, I was like, okay, I feel like I can finish this because there's so much stuff going on after this. But that
Yeah.
18-mile mark was really challenging just because of like the heat and just not feeling awesome as far as my legs were concerned.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, and was it hard to, cuz mile 18 is a tough spot to like stop to. It was it tough to get back going, or were you able to find your rhythm pretty quickly?
I mean, I feel like since I was already doing like the run walk thing, it worked out okay because like my body
Mm,
was already used to slowing down and speeding up. So it may be, my legs were maybe a little stiff getting out of the gate, but I was at that point, I was just like, I just want to get this over with so that I can, go back to not ever running long races ever again. So.
yeah. You're like I'm just trying to check this off the list right now. Um did you hit the wall at all at any point where you were maybe having like thoughts of DNFing or anything like that?
No, I mean, I was always just pretty like committed to putting one foot in front of the other and finishing it
Mhm.
one way or the other. So, and like, I wasn't keeping track of my pace like that closely, but I knew I was like far enough ahead of the, sweepers that I had a big enough buffer that even if I was walking more than I originally planned to, I wasn't going to be so slow that they would cut me from the race.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. And then last, let's say like 2 to 3 miles, when things are that's when most people say they hit the pain cave and they really start to have to pull through. Like, did you what were you feeling in that moment?
So I feel like for this particular race, I didn't have that issue just because you go straight from like Hollywood Studios to the boardwalk area, which has a lot of hotels and shops. And like basically from that point to the end of the race, it was like nonstop spectators. And so there were like
Cool.
people lining the boardwalk, which was like amazing. And I feel like once we hit the boardwalk, I had this like extra burst of energy just because like I was like, we're so close, we're like 2, 3 miles away. And then I knew my sister and my brother-in-law were inside the park waiting for us. So I got through the boardwalk, got back into Epcot, and you run through the World Showcase, which is my favorite part of the park. But my sister and brother-in-law were waiting in the Germany section with a beer and a donut. So I actually picked up the beer and the donut from them. And at that point, I walked for basically from there until I got almost to the finish line. Not because I was in pain, but just because I didn't want to spill my beer and I wanted to save it for the finish line. So
Yeah.
I walked with my beer and my donut and got some really awesome pictures along the way. And then my parents and then my brother and my husband were at the finish line since my brother and my husband finished before me. So once I got closer to the finish line, then I ran across with my beer and my donut. And so that was kind of cool, just having everybody waiting at the finish line. And just like, there's not very many races where you can cross the finish line holding a beer. So
Yeah.
we had like already planned ahead of time, like we're crossing the finish line holding a beer. And she just happened to we were planning originally to do a pretzel and a beer. And apparently the pretzel place wasn't open yet. So that's how I ended up with a donut.
Oh,
She's like, "Do you want the beer or the donut?" I was like, "I'll take both." So,
yeah, both please. That's awesome though. You pre-planned that picture you said?
well, we pre-planned them getting the beer and the pretzel, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it would have been cooler with the pretzel, but it's almost even funnier with the donut.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. I love that. Did your husband do the same thing and your brother?
he got a donut, and apparently my brother was so miserable by the time he got to them that he was
Oh
like,
no.
"No, I don't want anything. Please don't give me anything."
Was he doing your brother doing it more for time? Like he was actually putting in
Uh,
like a
he
goal race, I guess?
I mean, not necessarily, but he's like very competitive. And so I think part of him was like, oh, I want to try and catch Matt, which is my husband. But also, just he had a lot of issues with like injuries and things while he was training. So I
Mm,
think his training just wasn't as good as like my husband and I were able to do. And so that made it tough for him too, because every time he'd get going, he'd have to slow down again, like, like cut back. So that made it tough going into the race, not having maybe as many miles as he originally planned to have.
gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, that's I mean, it does make a big difference to be able to kind of stretch out your training and take it like to have a little bit more mileage under your belt for sure. But for you, you said you and your husband were feeling pretty decent, would you say, at the end of the race?
Yeah, yeah, I felt like, great right at the end of the race, and obviously the
Mhm.
soreness kicked in later. But yeah, I felt like I finished the race feeling as strong as you can after running 26 miles. So
Yeah, it's never gonna feel amazing, but that's good that you weren't, just like immediately having to go sit and like stretch out or anything like that. I think that's a testament to how much you gave yourself to train, which is great. Looking back on the whole experience, is there anything that you would have changed your first time around, or do you feel like everything kind of went according to plan?
I mean, I feel pretty comfortable with how it went. Like I, like felt good about my fueling, and like even though the mileage was lower than a lot of the traditional plans, like I didn't feel like it wasn't enough going into the actual race.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
not I don't think I'd change anything.
That's a good way to end your first marathon without any regrets. I think that's great. And just a testament too. I know I brought it up on a couple of past episodes, but like a testament to there's no one way to train for a marathon. So many people do it with so many different training plans, and you're a good example of that. So I think that's great. So after the race, were you still feeling like one and done? I'm done with this thing. I did it. Checked it off the list. Never doing that again. Or how did you have any thoughts of like a second marathon?
Right after the race, I was still like, "Yep, check that off. I'm just gonna, I like this better than cardio, so I think I'm gonna, switch my cardio to like runs instead. But at that point, I was still pretty committed to not ever doing another marathon ever again, or any long distance race for that like even a half marathon. I was like, I'm gonna be a recreational runner and run the occasional 5K, and that's gonna be my jam.
Yeah. And then I know just because we talked a little bit before this that you really gotten into half marathons from there. So when after your marathon did you start to think about racing again?
So about 2 weeks after the marathon, my sister, who up until this point had like she actually walked the 5K 7 months pregnant. So
Wow, good for her.
she decided that after she had the baby, she maybe wanted to get into running. So 2 weeks after the marathon, she's like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a 15K like a year from now. Would you want to do it with me?" And so I was like, well, I can't let my sister run her first like long distance race by herself. So yeah, sure. It's like 13 months away. I still get plenty of time to like not worry about any long distance anything. And even that was like, it's a 15K, it's 9 miles. I feel like it's not in the double digits. It's okay.
Mhm.
Um, so, stuck with the recreational running. We went to a work dinner or something with some friends of my husband like a few months later. I think it was in May, and two of his friends there have done Rock and Roll Las Vegas, and were like talking about how awesome it was, and they're like, oh yeah, you guys should totally do it. And then somehow I got roped into agreeing to do the Rock and Roll Las Vegas half marathon, which was 3 weeks after the 15K that I'd already agreed to do.
Wow.
So now, after swearing off long distance racing, I have two races 3 weeks apart. So back to running in. So did the 15K, did the Rock and Roll Vegas half marathon, which I highly recommend. That race is amazing. They shut down the entire strip, so there's like plenty of room. There's no like choke points. So that's a really cool race. It was a little windy for my liking. The like probably entire last 5 miles were like directly into the wind, and because
Oh,
because it
geez.
starts at night, it was getting colder as the race went on, not hotter. And I think by the time we finished the race, it was like 45 degrees. So,
Yikes.
kind of like here, you never know what you're going to get in Vegas as far as the temperature goes. But while we were in Vegas, we had talked to, a lot of the other people there. And there was a bunch of people there who were like, oh, yeah, we're doing a race in every state. And like, this is our, like 50th state, and we're doing Nevada or whatever. And so, me being a very goal oriented person, and like someone who's very needs challenges to kind of keep me motivated to do things, I'm like, hey honey, do you think we could do all 50 states? And so uh he's like, yeah, I think maybe we could do that. So that we kind of decided that was going to be our thing, like to do together, not actually together because he's faster than me, but we've decided to do that. And so after that race, we didn't have anything else on the schedule, and then I immediately started like researching like what are some good races in every single state. And we decided that in the fall we were going to try and knock out some of the closer states, like pretty much all the ones we could drive to from Savannah. So we maybe got a little overzealous and signed up to do a half marathon in Cleveland, Tennessee, a half marathon in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then a half marathon in Hilton Head, South Carolina. And
Wow.
they were all about 2 months apart. So I was like, 2 months apart, that's good. And then this the same sister who wrote me into doing the 15K was like, I think I want to do the Walt Disney World half marathon. So now I've got my races totally spaced out 2 months apart, and now I'm doing a half marathon 3 weeks after the one in Charlotte. Yeah, so this one was the Disney one was in January again. So I'm like, okay, but after I got through the first half marathon, I was like, you know, that wasn't too bad. I think I want to do a marathon for my 40th birthday, and which is 2025. So this is still like, a couple years down the road, but I was like, I feel like I can do more, and so maybe I should do more. So I, kind of toyed with that idea. did these half marathons. So come so do those 2 half marathons. The one in Charlotte was way hillier than I expected it to be. Probably not hilly for people who actually live in hilly locations, but for someone who basically is living, in the flatlands, it was a very hilly race, but still
Yeah.
fun. And then, so a few weeks later, go to Disney. The night before that race, they decide they're going to shorten the half marathon for because of a cold front that was coming in, and they were worried about lightning. So instead
Mm,
of being a half marathon, it was 7.1 miles. And so I'm like, whatever, this is my third race. But my sister, of course, is devastated. So she originally was like, I'm not doing this race. Like, it's not worth it. And I'm like, okay, well, I paid $200 to be here. So I'm running this race, however
yeah,
long
might as
they'll let
well.
me. And like, thankfully, her husband and I talked her off the ledge and she ended up running it. And like, it actually ended up being okay because instead of running through half of Epcot and Magic Kingdom, they had us run through all of Epcot, which I thought was cool because we weren't supposed to do the World Showcase. And from the
Mm,
first race, like that was one of my favorite parts. And so I was like, oh, we get to run through the World Showcase. And in this case, we got to do it at night. So that was kind of fun because they
yeah.
still have all their Christmas decorations up when you do the marathon weekend in January. So all of the Christmas decorations were like on and like lit up. So that was kind of fun. So we finished that, get back to our hotel, and we had planned to, and it was pouring down rain at this point. So we had planned to go to the gym and, like finish the last 6 miles on the treadmill because we're like, we're doing a half marathon. So we get up there and there's a line of other runners who also decided that they were going to finish their last 6 miles on the treadmill.
That's funny.
So we're like, okay, well, it's not lightning, it's just raining. We're going to run 6 miles in circles around the Contemporary in the rain. And we were not the only ones doing it. But afterwards, like my sister was like, I think the 6 miles we did around the hotel with the other runners, like in the rain, was even better than the actual race through the park. Just the kind of the camaraderie and the commitment, and like every time we'd pass somebody, like everybody's cheering for each other. So it was just a really cool experience as far as like how supportive the running community is, and also like, hey, we're not the only crazy ones that are out here running in the pouring rain just to finish this last 6 miles. So that was, even though it wasn't like the ideal first half marathon, it was still a cool experience. And she has
Yeah,
not quit running, so at least it didn't deter her from running.
that's good. That's good. What a cool experience, though.
hmm
Do you know? I know you've only ran one full marathon, but do you have do you prefer half marathons over marathons? Or is it more just like those are what you could do a little bit more consistently?
I mean, half marathon logistically, especially with like me and my husband having to tag team for training, is it's just more doable because the longest run I ever do is like 2 hours, and that's only like maybe once or twice. And so it's just more manageable with the kids, at least until like our oldest gets old enough to babysit. So we've still got a little ways to go on that. And we have like his parents live close by, but I try not to overutilize them, and I also don't want to make them get up early on a Saturday just so I can go running when they're
Sure.
retired and can sleep in. So they did help us out some during the marathon training, because on some of the longer runs, I was like, I really don't want to run 16 miles at like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So
Right.
thankfully, they did help us out some with that, and I'm extremely grateful. So, but we try not to use them too much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge time commitment. So anybody I'm sure that can help you out so that you can get your stuff done in the morning, knock it out is going to be beneficial for sure. So what's kind of the goal from here? I know you want to run a half marathon in every state, or at least a race in every state. Do you have some races that you're eyeballing right now, or are you still kind of thinking about it?
So had planned that marathon for my 40th birthday next year, and then they announced the Every Woman's Marathon, which is local for me. And I was like, well, dang, I just decided I was going to do another marathon, and so I felt obligated to sign up for that.
Yeah.
So I signed up for that, which is I think November 16th, and then November 2nd, 2 weeks before that, I'm doing a race in Arkansas in Conway, Arkansas, which is the middle of nowhere, but it's really close to my grandma, so I haven't seen her in a while, so I wanted to kind of combine those two things and see her at the same time. And then my husband decided he wasn't going to run a women's marathon, but he still wanted to run a marathon. And so he decided we're going to go to Huntsville, Alabama, to the Rocket City, and he's doing the marathon, and I'm doing the half. But like that half and the one in Arkansas, I'm not planning to race either of those. I mean, I'm never really focused on my pace, but for those two specifically, I'm like, I'm just going to take it easy and consider these a training run. And then my sister lives in Tampa, and they do like a big race weekend for Gasparilla, their like pirate festival every
Mm.
year in February. And so my sister, who has definitely caught the bug as well, and I signed up to do one of their challenges, which is a 15K on Saturday and a half on Sunday. So
Wow.
I haven't talked her into a marathon yet, but she's definitely caught the bug hard.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're getting the whole family into it, which is cool. I mean that 15K and then a half marathon, that's pretty close. She's gonna be putting a lot of miles on her for the full weekend, so she's getting close to doing the full thing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, cool. That's exciting that you've got so much coming up. Are you you know you said they're all later in the year, but are you in training season right now or are you kind of base building? What are you working on at the moment?
I mean, I just started training this week for the marathon, but I'm still using that like same train as one platform. And I think
Yeah.
just because it's so like hot and humid down here, like, I mean, my first long run was 2.5 miles this morning. So, it's definitely starting out slow, but again, it seemed to work well the first time. So I trust that it'll work well the second time as well.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and you mentioned you did a lot of like research and stuff on fueling the first time around. Is there anything that you're going to change this time around or kind of sticking with the same strategy?
So I've been part of like a running Facebook, like a running strength training community on Facebook, and had actually learned about Tailwind in that group. So actually after my fall half marathon, I was like, "Hey, well, it would be really nice not to have to carry gels and water, so maybe I'll try this and see how that works." And it's been working great. So I actually switched from the goo to the Tailwind, and I've been using that pretty much exclusively. I mean, as of yet, I haven't had any races that don't allow you to bring like your own water bottle or like the hydration vest. I feel like for the halves, I haven't really needed the hydration vest because I've just used the water stations. But for the marathon, I'm planning to wear the vest
Yeah.
so I'll be able to carry enough for the whole race.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a big fan of vests also. I like the control. Like God forbid they run out of water at a water station. I don't want to be in that that situation.
Hmm.
So Tailwind, I like Tailwind as well. Do you notice like a big difference between using gels versus just using like an electrolyte powder on a run?
I mean, not really. And like the way that the Tailwind, the endurance fuel works is it's got like carbs and electrolytes. So basically, one scoop of the Tailwind has the same amount of calories as one gel. And so
Mm,
I actually really like it, especially with this hotter weather, because I feel like it forces me to get enough hydration because I need the calories. And so I'm
mm,
drinking basically, I usually try to drink it like a few sips like every 15 minutes or something, just to make sure that I'm getting enough in. And so I haven't felt like it's like I've hit a wall or anything using it. I also have never trained for a marathon using it, so we'll see how that goes. Depending on like how that goes, I might have to add, like maybe a gel or an hour or something, but I'm gonna try it with just that at first and see what happens.
cool. Cool. Yeah, it's all trial and error right now, so you'll be able to test out a few things on your long runs, which will be
Hmm.
good. Well, cool. And then I'm curious also about like shoes and what you've liked for shoes over time. Since you've been training for your first marathon and now training for your second marathon, are there specific shoes that you've tried and you like?
So for my first half marathon, the virtual one I did, I was wearing Skechers because I did
Oh
not know
wow.
any better. And and
Yeah.
Skechers that were the correct size, meaning they were not sized up. And so I actually ended up
Gotcha.
losing a toenail from that race. But after that, I went to Fleet Feet and got fitted for shoes. And they originally put me in Hoka's, and then I was getting like low back pain from those, and so they switched me to the Glycerins, I think the Glycerin 19 was like the first one I had, and I loved those. And I stuck with those all the way until I was getting close to the Disney half that I was doing with my sister. And we had decided that we wanted to do Disney princesses, and so I was Snow White and I needed yellow shoes, and they didn't have yellow glycerins. And so I temporarily switched to the New Balance 1080, which was similar, like cushion wise, just because they had the color I wanted. But then sometime during that, I had read Born to Run and was extremely intrigued by the kind of zero drop shoes, but didn't want to switch while I was in the middle of training for like a million half marathons in a row. So after I finished with that, I actually have switched to the Ultra Torin 7, and I kind of they have you like gradually switch into those shoes. They've actually been working really well. So I didn't notice any problems switching from like the higher drop to the lower drop, like working into them gradually the way that they told you to.
Sure. Yeah, what is it about the lower drop shoes that like you really like, I guess?
It's supposed to be better just for like the health of your foot. Like it's supposed to make your foot like in a more natural position and strengthen
Hmm.
kind of your foot muscles some. So, I mean, I don't know how much of that is beneficial, but I figured it was worth a shot. And I always get them from Fleet Feet because they have the guarantee. So I figured if they didn't work or they caused any problems, I could just give them back and get the glycerins again.
Totally. Yeah.
So I've always
Yeah.
got that as my like backup option if these don't work out. Because again, I've been wearing them for like my shorter summer runs, but I've never used them for longer distances. So we'll kind of see how that goes.
Cool. No, that's interesting. We'll have to see how they work out for you for sure. And then my last couple questions are just like advice. So I know I asked you about being a mother and like balancing all of that in marathon training, but just generally, if somebody's like thinking about running their first marathon, what advice would you give them?
I mean, if you're interested in doing it and you have, you have the time to commit to like at least, you know, shorter runs during the week and long runs on Saturdays, go ahead and do it. I do think having the time to train for it is important because I would not have wanted to go in not having at least done, you know, like the 16-mile runs. But I think if you have the time to like do the long runs on Saturdays and you are thinking maybe it's something you'd like to do, go ahead and do it. Like don't be scared, just sign up.
Yeah, that's great. And then I know like way when we started this interview and even before when we started talking, you said that you hated running. You were not a big fan of running in the beginning. What do you feel like really made you fall in love with running? If it's any one thing you can boil it down to.
I mean, I think my biggest issue when I'd run before is I would run as fast as I could for as long as I could, which probably was like a quarter mile, a half a mile, and then I'd be dying, and then I would just walk for the majority of it, and maybe consider sprinting again if I like cooled down. But I think the main thing was slowing down, like kind of embracing, like starting slower, because it was usually going too fast and being so out of breath that I think made me dislike the running initially.
Yeah, I think that's great. Slow down. That's advice that that anybody I think can take, whether you're an experienced runner or you're a beginner runner. Just take your easy runs easy, and I think that helps with like longevity and liking running longer term instead of burning yourself out pretty early. So that's great. Well, cool. Well, I'm excited to see what's coming up next for you with all of these marathons and these half marathons that you're looking into running. If anybody wants to follow along with you, where can they find you?
I'm on Instagram, 50 states, 50 races, the number 50. And
Sweet.
there's not much on there because it's a reasonably new page, but I'm hoping to kind of post more of my training and future races on there.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to see you kind of knock out that goal and knock out your second marathon. It'll be great to see some posts about that for sure. And I'll make sure to link your Instagram in the show notes as well. But thank you again for walking through your experience. It was really great talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you're enjoying MFM, it would mean a lot to me if you could rate and review this episode wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you know anyone training right now, I'd love if you shared it with them too. See you on the next one.